Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents If the Ice Had Held by Wendy J. Fox. Read by Sarah Mollo-Christensen. Chapter 1. Kathleen. Winter, 1974. Kathleen wondered why, if half the human body was really made of water, how water could be so dangerous. Her brother Sammy had split the ice of the river trying to cross, and he floated to the shore, found by a towny cop before he was even missed. She didn't understand, if he wasn't sunk, why the river couldn't lift him, glide him to the banks until his toes touched gravel and he put his legs down and walked back into the night. Glistening with cold, yes. Lips blue, yes. Skin brittle to the touch. Clothes sopping and the hem of his jeans just starting to freeze, but still with breath, heat from his lungs condensing the air around him. Instead, the officer heaved him from the water in the dark of the winter evening, Sammy's teenaged body sharp with ice. Chapter 2. Melanie. Spring 2007. The software company in Denver where Melanie worked was in the majority of how startups ran, less glamorous than the swanky .coms of Silicon Valley, with their organic catering menus, on-site yoga, and complimentary Rolfing massage coupons, and more high-acid paper files sweltering under the heat of 100 laptops, payroll cobbled out of questionable revenue recognition processes, and strings of code written under the damp pressure of a hangover. Their space was not sky-high and bathed in clean, filtered light, but rather it occupied the ground-floor wing of a crumbling office park where the air conditioning was troubling and unreliable. All through her 20s, Melanie had bounced back and forth between jobs, and then finally, on the eve of her third decade, she landed this one. Through the issue of a company phone and a 5-page document explaining how the 401k vested, she transformed into her idea of an adult and had stayed tethered to the company since then. The job gave her enough money to secure and pay a mortgage on a small condo close to downtown, to help her mother Kathleen out once in a while, and it gave her enough order to dampen the feeling of spinning she'd always had, even if only for moments. Since she worked in tech, the model was acquisition, and she was not naive to this. The model meant that the founders and a few of the earliest employees would cash out, and the rest of them would stay in the office, typing toward a different destiny. Same keyboards, same products, just new letterhead that sat in the same place as the old letterhead, in a crumpled box under the printer. Still, when it actually happened, she had no idea the company had been for sale until she was asked to proofread the press release. Like an iffy check, it was post-dated by several weeks and gave her a queasy feeling. "Are there going to be layoffs?" she had asked her boss. She was in a small department where she did marketing and market analysis. She was hired without any training back when the company was not profitable. They'd taken a chance on her, so she felt a kind of loyalty. Still, she had read enough to know how acquisitions went. A team from corporate would make people redundant, and then the rest of the employees would plow through, taking on more and more work and living in terror of their cable bill. Her boss told her not to talk about it. Her boss told her not to make any stock purchases of the publicly traded parent. "You could be considered an insider," her boss had said, and raised her eyebrow to a dangerous slope, like they were talking about a real tip, a life changer. Melanie did not think their little company being absorbed into a conglomerate would make even a blip in the markets, but she swore to secrecy anyway. Later, when she was not let go, and she told her new coworkers at headquarters in Chicago that she had to look them up, they were shocked. "We are on the Fortune 500, they had said. "Right," she had said. "There are 500 of those?" She wondered if people who had gone to business school memorized this list, like the state capitals, or the names of the saints. Chapter 3. Irene. Winter, 1974. Irene wasn't sure if she should go to the funeral, but she also couldn't stay away. She thought that was just like Sammy, pulling at her even after he was gone. It was hard to remain contained. The flowers, the handful of people sweating in their formal clothes that were too warm for the church with the heat cranking, the way there was so much silence because the pastor, or the minister, or whoever he was, didn't know Sammy, so he just did the usual passages, the ashes and such, and no one from the family got up to speak. The only other funeral she had been to was her aunt and uncle's when they were in a car accident with a tractor-trailer carrying crates of chickens. They hadn't even been the vehicle directly involved. They'd only swerved to avoid the wreckage on the highway. She had been very young, but she remembered that after that, she didn't see her older cousin, Lucy Estelle, as much anymore. At the service, her father, her rigid and snapping father, was like a boy. She had been only 10, but she knew what it meant to see him cry for the first time. It wasn't even really a funeral, just a memorial at the VFW, but she saw her father bare then, raw from sobbing and from having drunk whiskey all day and then from sobbing some more. In front of the people who had come to pay their respects to the man and the woman who had taken their last breaths in a crumple of iron while the down from the spilt chickens clung to them like frost, her father had opened. Her father had told the story of him and his brother as young enlisted men, briefly, and then he moved backward. 2 boys on a farm at the end of a dirt road, and how they were so lucky. "Your closest sibling is your first friend," he had said, and her father and his brother had stayed that way, the first person to notify of trouble and of joy. She was 14 now, and so Irene had planned something to say if there were words at Sammy's funeral. "I know you do not know me," she would say to this small group of people who had gathered, mostly family, "but I loved your brother, your son. I know you do not know me, but I know how Sammy spoke of every person here, though I am sorry if I might not get your faces. Mikey and Kathleen, your brother loved you. Jeanette and Rose and Darlene and Thomas, Mom and Dad. All he ever wanted was to be with you. I never had jealousy toward other girls, only you all." If she was very, very brave, she might tell the rest of it. That she was pregnant, that they had planned to marry. But since no space was offered for anyone to speak, she only hitched a ride to the gravesite with someone she didn't know, keeping her silence through the drive to the cemetery, where she watched Sammy's casket get lowered into the ground. After, she turned and walked back toward home, the weight of the baby like a penance, like a gift. When Kathleen came walking up the hill behind the school towards Irene, it was easy to see how Sammy's sister was like him. He had been the same, direct about what he wanted. Kathleen introduced herself, and she offered some thanks for coming to the service. Irene was not sure if she was supposed to shake the sister's hand or cry. Irene took a drag from her cigarette, even though every time she smoked, her stomach turned over. She had tried to stop, but it had been hard with her father puffing in the house, and so she gave up, and she told herself she had bigger things to worry about than cigarettes. There was a knot in her shoulder that ached when she turned her head, and a dull pain in her lower back all of the time. There was her messy room, and the way her body was changing. If she had thought the beginning of adolescence was bad, she felt a fool now, not even on the other side of puberty. The way she'd prayed for her breasts to bud and her cycle to begin because she thought these changes would make her a woman. What she didn't know then was the change that comes when the cycle is interrupted, the blooming of the breasts, the tension at the belly, the smell of everything, and the hunger. Irene was a freshman, and the fact that her body was starting to form a child before she could drive or vote or legally live on her own was not lost on her. She understood she was young, even if she was the oldest that she'd ever been. The other girl, the sister, Kathleen, was tall, like Sammy, and also resembled him in the face, though Irene was not sure how much she could trust this girl who came to her in the snow, who came to her seeking the part of her brother that Irene carried. She was sure the sister knew, even though they had not yet gotten very far past introductions. Irene put out her hand. "He mentioned you," Irene said as the school's bell rang. She wanted to give something else, like, "It seemed like he loved you best," or "He mentioned what an amazing auntie you would be." Both were true, but it was hard to feel like anything was worth telling with him gone. "We should talk," Kathleen said, but Irene turned to go back to class. The sister followed like a dog would, half a length back and a few paces to the side, determined. The words Irene had inside of her at the funeral seemed so whole, a little orb, as though she'd been able to imagine saying her piece. "I know you do not know me, but I loved your brother, your son." Like the child inside her, getting something into the air of the world was harder than thinking about it. It was stupid of them to get pregnant, and it seemed stupid, now that he was gone, that they'd not just talked to Sammy's folks, even to the sister, Kathleen, whom he was closest with. His people wouldn't have cared, but he was trying to do right first, get a ring on her finger, get a better job than working at the stockyard. She and Sammy were trying to smooth it out, trying to show they could be responsible by making a plan and keeping it before they told their secret. Now Kathleen was tracking her through the snow, and Irene was sure Sammy's sister would not give up in trying to know her. Irene did not want to be known. She'd let Sammy get close to her and see, just look at what had happened. Chapter 4. Melanie. Spring 2007. It was spring in Colorado, and the April temperatures swung in wide, dramatic swaths. Melanie's potted petunias were wiped out one chilly morning, but by the time she came home, the Gerbera daisies were sizzling in the afternoon sun, and she poured an entire can of water across the wilted leaves, hoping. At work, the day after the acquisition announcement, the air conditioning would not come on. The administrative assistant called building maintenance, and one of the developers opened up the door to the server room, a frazzled, wheezing center of physical technology linked by frayed cables and tethered to overworked outlets. The door was propped open with old manuals, like C++ for Dummies and Mastering the AS400. There was a fan, ordered specifically for the purpose of cooling the server room, and it was switched on. Melanie went back to her office, which shared a wall with the parking garage, making it extremely noisy. She followed the business journals, and she knew that the trend was to move everyone into pods or low-walled cubicles. This depressed her because she understood that collaboration was code for "you will never take a personal call on the clock again, ever," and she clung to her private space, sneaking in during a 3-day weekend to paint her office walls the same yellow as her childhood bedroom, bringing in an enormous palm that she cultivated in a red ceramic pot and changing out the overhead fluorescent lights for Reptiglow terrarium bulbs. From the packaging, she learned that there were only 3 elements of light that were required for reptile husbandry: ultraviolet, visible, and infrared. The package read that a combination of different light sources was necessary in most cases. With the yellow paint and the faintly pink glow of the reptilites, Melanie felt that she was creating a productive environment. Her palm had healthy green leaves, and her office had a more rarefied ambiance than those around her. Some of the other spaces attracted miller moths when they migrated from the Kansas plains to the Colorado foothills, but even with the lights blazing, her work area was clear of the dusty wings and cocoon debris, and while she had no intention of actually breeding reptiles, the fact that she could sustain creatures outside of arthropoda was sometimes a comfort for her, when a long night had turned the glow of her champagne walls to the pissy shade of decaying newspaper. The office was heating up as Melanie worked on an analysis of the industrial marketplace. She was disturbed by how many times the word penetration was used in the report request, alongside the more benign words fastener and HVAC. The report had been assigned to her a few months ago, and now she understood that it was related to the acquisition. There were growth targets to maintain, markets to penetrate. She started to sweat. While she thought, she read the New York Times online. She created a chart. She was very good at charts. What Melanie liked even more than the Times were advice columns. The whole genre was enthralling. In a different life, she would have liked to have this job, offering wisdom on a variety of topics from etiquette to sex. As a teenager, she had pored over her horoscopes. On Wednesday, Melanie flew to San Antonio. On Thursday, she woke up in San Antonio with a headache, her return ticket safely duplicated in her email, and a snoring man in her bed. This wasn't unusual for her, really, and in software, in technology in general, there was the industry advantage, or disadvantage depending on how it was sliced, of men outnumbering women by 4 to 1. Usually they were easy, either introverts or married so long that they had temporarily forgotten how their bodies worked. She spent days on the road with the ones who were her coworkers, hawking a product she did not always understand. They called the software a suite, like in a building. They talked about enablement and velocity and time to value. They all knew many acronyms, and the man lying next to her was no different, even if her skin touched his. This San Antonio man had sideswiped her some, a bright spot at an otherwise dull trade show. She had broken one of her own rules: never coworkers, never customers. While she felt she had a flexible relationship with consequences, accepting them mostly, she still groaned as she collected her clothes and put them on in the bathroom. She focused on how amazing a cup of coffee and a shower would be. A month ago, Melanie had been in Chicago with a man named Brian, who seemed to solidly hate his life. She wasn't sure if this was worse than the San Antonio man, who was just starting to hate his. What some women liked about the kind of job that she had, when they could get them, was that it was a profession similar to being a wife, except it paid. When traveling, she reminded her colleagues to catch every loop on the waist of their trousers with their belts, and she sent them back to their rooms if there was powdered sugar from breakfast donuts sprinkled on their shirts, and she liked, even, doing it cheerfully. She made sure everything ran smoothly. "Just saying," sometimes she said, "that's not a good look," and flashed a wide, toothy smile. She offered wet wipes for grubby hands and antacids for rumbling bellies. She scheduled their lunch breaks and made dinner reservations. Her real job was market research and keeping the teams on track with corporate message points, but she found this was much easier when no one was hungry or had diarrhea. The night before, the San Antonio man, who, when Melanie came out of the bathroom, she could see was still asleep but had flopped onto the middle of the bed, had said to her something about unhappiness, about the pressure of family, of economics, about the way he thought he was doing everything right but still felt horrible. "Fucking me is not going to change anything," she had thought to say to him, but instead she offered her bulletproof smile. "I get it," she had said instead. "It's tough out there." "It is tough," he had said. "I'm trying so hard." It was this kind of conversation that would perpetually lead her and others like her to spend their company's money on too many beers, resulting in shacking up in Austin or Anaheim with one of their rooms, usually hers, left sitting empty. $179 a night to hold a discarded lip gloss. The men she met on the road liked her because she fucked. and they liked her because she asked questions. When the wheels came down in their towns, they would go home to their wives, energized by the reminder that a sex life was still possible, and she would go home to her townhouse in Denver and take a long shower, shave every place on her body they could have possibly been, and move on. Usually it was in early spring that the moths fluttered through the office. Melanie had read that moths were a rich food for predators like brown bears because 72% of the moth's body weight was made up of fat, making it more calorie-dense than elk or deer. Also, she wondered about her colleagues' home lives. Did they like spending their days in a cramped office among the hum of machines, and did they like fighting traffic back to their wide, open floor-plan homes in the immediate suburbs and beyond? Did they like wrangling a car seat into the rear of their Honda and going home to the production of dinner time? Or would they rather be with her, tangled in hotel sheets with their cell phones on mute, pretending to have a different life where no one ever had to make the bed or run out of beer? It seemed obvious to her what the right answer was. The right answer included room and laundry service, but she also did not blame them for returning to their families. At work on Friday, she was composing an email when one of the sales staff, the one she had spent the night with in San Antonio, came into her office and closed the door. Her indoor windows looked into the hallway, carpeted in blue-gray, and she looked past him, past the articles and cartoons she had taped up in reverse so that the text faced the outside. One of her clippings was in anticipation of Easter, with 2 chocolate bunnies, the first missing his hind side, who said, "My butt hurts," and the second missing his ears, who said, "What?" And she focused on this as he was speaking. He said that he had been thinking of her, and Melanie thought the force of his breathing was making her potted palm rustle, but she listened. She knew she deserved this, since she had broken the rule. Customers were about propriety. Co-workers, proximity. He said that he had told his wife, and that his wife was not happy, but that she understood, or she said she understood, except that he was not really sure she understood. Understands what? Melanie said. The bunnies were a classic, she thought, relevant beyond the crucifixion at Calvary, beyond Peeps. His eyes opened a little wider and then closed all the way. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. Melanie turned her head. The palm leaves were definitely rustling. "You should," she said. "You have to. You have children. I haven't been thinking of you," she said. She flashed again on Chicago, a month ago. Brian, another married man with kids. She wondered about their problems. The San Antonio man, Alex, looked at his hands. Her email was beeping, and the room was growing warm. "Okay, I did think of you once," she said to him. "I thought of you when I was thinking how creepy San Antonio SeaWorld was. Because remember that? Remember the beluga whales?" He remembered. He said that he remembered she was upset that the dolphins and all of the sea creatures were so far from the ocean, and Melanie affirmed that yes, she had been very upset. She had eaten meat her entire life, but there was something about an inland Texas shark tank that made her want to swear off the flesh of animals forever, and she had even checked her GPS, appalled to confirm that San Antonio was indeed landlocked. "So I was thinking that you made that easier, and I was appreciative for that," she said. "Thank you," she said. The night after the driest sea world in existence, Melanie had drunk too much cheap trade show Chardonnay, and she took Alex to a bar near their hotel that she had been to once before on some other trip, with some other San Antonio man. The bar served nothing but off-brand spirits and peanuts. Peanut shells covered the floor. When she complained that she had husks between her toes, wedged in her open shoes and demolishing her pedicure, he had done something that she thought was ridiculous and charming, which was to throw down his jacket over the discarded hulls to allow her to crunch unmolested to the bar. where she ordered a Crystal Palace vodka tonic because it was all they had. He was sweet, then. She wondered what his dry cleaner would think, and also, he was in a junior role, so it was probably his only good coat. After that, they had gone to his room, where he had been kind and polite and tentative, like an inexperienced young lover, but she liked this. In the morning, they were at a breakfast seminar that reeked of pork. She had oatmeal. They were silent in her office. Her laptop hummed. She had it plugged into a larger screen to prevent eye strain, but the screen was flickering and making a concerning electronic sound. "But I told my wife," he said. Her palm tree, lush from the reptilites and her diligent watering, swished in a way that meant she needed to end this conversation. "I have to make a call now," she said, and she picked up her desk phone to punctuate. It was 11:17 a.m., and she started to dial her own mobile, which she hoped he would not notice vibrating next to her. Melanie lived in a townhouse that had a tiny yard and nice trim. It took her 7 minutes to mow the lawn, but 4 of that was getting the lawnmower started. The lawnmower sounded like a train coming off the rails, and the dull blade seemed to push the grass over more than cut it, but she didn't mind. She had planted irises and sunflowers, a cascade of purple and yellow. She had also planted lilies, which stubbornly came up in the same shades, even though she was sure she had picked orange and red. That night, she sat in her yard and ate a reduced-calorie microwave meal and thought about Alex, the San Antonio man. He thought he was different, but he wasn't different. She felt bad that he had told his wife. She didn't like that he had felt guilty, but mostly she didn't like that he had then passed his guilt on to his spouse. One of the things about married guys, she had found, was that it was hard to get them to use condoms. Either they were just enough older than her that they didn't quite believe the reality of modern sex, or, like Alex, because they were partnered, they believed they were clean. Melanie did not say to any of them that if they were considering sleeping with her, their wives might be sleeping with the nanny, and if Melanie was considering sleeping with them, then probably she had slept with someone else like them. The grass was cool and her entree warm. She had her BlackBerry with her, and her email was beeping. She wanted to think her email was beeping again, but it was always beeping, and she opened an all-staff message from Central HR. "We have just received news that Kyle Walker passed away this evening. Kyle faced his battle with cancer bravely, and we will always remember his service to the company. Many of you knew Kyle well, and we suggest that you keep his wife, Amanda, in your thoughts. Some of you have already inquired if there is a memorial fund for Kyle. Management asks that you please refrain from soliciting or collecting donations on behalf of the Walker family on company property, as this could have tax implications. The company foundation has provided a fruit basket, and as a courtesy, your name is signed on the card as it appears in human resource records. Please expect to see a $2.18 automatic deduction on your next statement from payroll." Melanie read the message again, then tossed her phone into the yard, irritated. She ate some more of her noodles. The magnolia tree she had painstakingly weaned off of a big-box home improvement store fertilizer addiction was drooping in the corner against the cedar fence planks. Sometimes she sprinkled a little Miracle-Gro around the base of it, just to give it a taste of its old life, and she wondered if now would be a good time. What she liked about the magnolia was that it could reproduce with the help of beetles. The leaves and flowers were tough and ancient, having evolved before there were bees. She hadn't ever seen a beetle in her yard, but she imagined their hard bodies doing the delicate work of pollination, and this seemed practical and calming to her. After discarding the cardboard tray and the plastic fork from her meal into the trash, she looked for the red LED light of her phone. When she picked it up, there were more emails beeping about Kyle. She had worked with him since before the acquisition. She remembered talking to him just before he went on leave, only a few months ago. She had told him how good he looked because he had lost so much weight. She didn't know...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?